Hey, happy Sunday night, or maybe it is Monday morning, or Monday afternoon, or Monday evening. Checking your Google Classroom for our next assignment here in U.S. history. And let me just say, first hour, once again, you guys rocked it pretty good. Got your on decks done, up and run, up and flowing. And then obviously, our next big idea kind of dealing with the 50s. And so, what we had last week with the 1950s is. A time period of like peace and progress and prosperity. And that's definitely was the case of the 50s. At the same time, we were still dealing in the United States with poverty. So even though we saw the growth of the middle class and suburbs, we still had poverty. We saw many examples of racism and prejudice going on in the 50s. And so there were still a lot of problems going on in the 50s. So even though it's kind of like splashed, a phenomenal decade of peace and progress and prosperity. I mean, there's some definitely good examples of that, but at the same time, there are some tough things to deal with during the 1950s. And so, in your Google Classroom, and what I have on our big screen right here is our next big idea, and we'll create a new living document or a Google presentation. We'll probably do a living document for the next couple weeks. I know doing the same thing over and over can be boring and whatnot. So I'm going to try to do some research on maybe try to come up with something new. Better yet, if you guys have a better idea on what we can do going forward other than a living document or a Google presentation, share that with me. Or maybe you're doing something in another class I think is pretty cool, pretty neat. Share that with me too. So kind of plan on doing the living documents for a few more weeks. But if you guys have an idea of doing something different, yeah, I'm open to some ideas. I'm open to some suggestions. Okay. Our unit here is going to deal with TCI chapters 42 and 43. And so TCI chapter 42 is going to focus in a little bit more on the white flight, as it was talked about, how the minority groups pretty much stayed in the cities during the 50s. And basically, if you had money, you had opportunities, you left the cities. And that's when we started to get these suburbs being built. And so kind of deal with the poverty and the crime that kind of goes on in the cities, kind of known as left behind in the inner cities. So some chunk reading on that. Again, I just kind of highlight the chunk that I want you to read. I know you guys get it. I was going to say it anyway. That's the only chunk you need to read from TCI 42 too. And then you got the questions there that you need to answer going into your living document. Okay. TCI chapter 43 deals more with like the racism, the prejudice that still continues in the 50s. One of our connections here that I kind of want to make is we have the prejudice and the racism going on in the United States during the 1950s, but we just got done fighting a war, a world war, World War II, where we were fighting against prejudice, where we were fighting against racism. If you remember some of the examples of Germany and the Holocaust, I mean, that's racism exclamation point by 1,000. And so here we go off in the United States to do good and to fight against racism and oppression. But then at the same time, we're doing the same thing in our country to minority groups. And so eventually that's got to come to a change, because you just can't, go off and fight a war and lose American lives to end prejudice someplace else and then continue the prejudice going on here. So TCI 43 deals more with the prejudice that kind of continues and how it'll eventually come to an end. So segregation and public accommodations. And then you've got a major chunk to read here dealing with small steps towards equality. Also read Breaking the Color Line in Sports. This is where we start to get integration of African Americans into our professional sports world. And then eventually we'll also desegregate our armed forces. Even though we know that African Americans and Asian Americans and Hispanic Americans had an opportunity to fight in these wars, but they were always kind of lumped together. And of course, today we now know that we fight under one flag and everybody wears the same uniform, and so it's no longer segregated. So that kind of comes to an end in the 50s as well. And we've got a landmark ruling video here to watch on Rosa Parks. Good stuff. And then on Tuesday morning, I'll splash a little teaching moment from Mr. Flynn, kind of dealing with a guy by the name of Thurgood. Yeah, Thurgood Marshall. So that's kind of what we're going to be learning next. Any questions, you can email. I think most of the time I was able to get to your emails last week. And I'll have some office hours posted here for you guys in our Google Classrooms coming on Monday and Thursday. So I'll get that posted on our Google Classroom. If you have any questions, we can zoom in if we need to zoom in. Okay, so that kind of concludes our agenda for the second week of semester 3.